The medical bay of the horizon's edge hummed with the soft sound of machines keeping watch over life. The lights were set to a warm glow, not too bright, because the ship carried passengers from many different worlds, and some of them had very sensitive eyes. Jake Morrison stood at his workstation, checking the supplies in the medical cabinet. His hands moved with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. He was tall, but not too tall, with brown hair that was starting to show gray at the sides. His face had lines around the eyes, the kind that came from years of smiling and years of worry, both mixed together. The door slid open with a quiet hiss. A young Velkari navigator named Shira stepped inside, holding her left arm close to her body. The Velkari looked almost human, except their skin had a faint blue tint and their eyes were larger, with golden irises that seemed to catch every bit of light. Shira's face showed pain, but she was trying to hide it. "Sorry to bother you, Medic Morrison," she said softly. Her voice had a musical quality that all Velkari possessed. "I had an accident in the navigation room, cut my arm on a broken panel." Jake turned to her with a warm smile. "No bother at all. That's what I'm here for. Come sit down, let me take a look." He guided her to the examination chair and gently took her arm. The cut was not deep, but it was long, running from her wrist almost to her elbow. Blue blood had stained her uniform sleeve. Jake worked quickly and carefully, cleaning the wound first with a solution that worked on Velkari biology. He had to know the medicine for dozens of species, and he kept all that information organized in his head like a library. "This will sting a little," he warned before applying the antiseptic. Shira flinched but did not pull away. "You are doing great. The cut is clean. No debris inside. You will be fine in a few days." As Jake worked, applying a bonding gel that would help the skin heal faster, Shira's eyes wandered to his arms. His sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, and both his forearms were covered in tattoos. But these were not ordinary tattoos. Each one was completely different from the others. Some had colors that seemed to glow softly under the medical lights. Others had patterns so intricate they looked like they were moving. One patch of ink on his right arm actually seemed to shift in color, going from deep blue to silver and back again. "Your markings," Shira said, curiosity overcoming her usual politeness. "I have never seen anything like them. Are they decorative? Do humans mark themselves for beauty?" Jake paused in his work and glanced down at his arms. A small, sad smile crossed his face. It was the kind of smile that held many memories, not all of them happy. "Some humans do get tattoos just for beauty," he said. "But mine are different. Each one has a story. Each one represents something important to me." Shira leaned forward slightly, her pain forgotten for the moment. "What do they represent?" Jake finished applying the bonding gel and wrapped her arm in a light bandage. Then he sat back and looked at his arms. Really looked at them, as if seeing them for the first time in a while. "Each one is a species I have saved," he said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Shira's golden eyes widened. "A species? You mean an entire species?" "Not every single member," Jake clarified, "but enough to make a difference, enough to keep them from disappearing." He touched one of the tattoos on his left forearm, a swirling pattern of blues and silvers that seemed to pulse with its own light. This was the first one. The medical bay suddenly felt smaller, more intimate. Outside the window, stars streaked by as the ship traveled through the corridors of space. But inside, time seemed to slow down. Shira found herself leaning in, wanting to hear more. "Would you tell me about them?" she asked. "If it is not too painful to remember." Jake considered this. He did not talk about his past very often. The memories were heavy, full of hard choices and impossible situations. But something about Shira's genuine interest, her open curiosity, made him want to share. Maybe it was because the ship had been tense lately. The horizon's edge was carrying diplomats and representatives from many species, all heading to a peace conference. There had been arguments in the common areas, cold silences in the dining hall. The different species aboard did not trust each other, did not understand each other. Maybe his stories could help with that. Maybe if people understood what he had learned, that every species had value, every life was worth fighting for, it would ease some of the tension. "I will tell you," Jake said. "But I should warn you, some of these stories are not easy. I have seen terrible things. I have watched people die. But I have also seen the best of what life can be, the strength and beauty in beings that are nothing like me." Shira nodded solemnly. "I want to hear them. All of them, if you are willing." Jake stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out 2 containers of liquid. He handed one to Shira. "Drink this. It will help with the pain and speed up your healing." He took a sip from his own container, something that looked like tea but smelled faintly of mint and something earthier. Then he settled into a chair across from her. "I have been a medic for 17 years, Jake began. "I started young, barely, 20 years old, fresh from medical training and full of ideas about saving lives. The military sent me to the Outer Rim territories, the wild edges of known space where humans were just starting to make contact with other species. It was exciting and terrifying. Everything was new. Everything was unknown." He touched the swirling blue and silver tattoo again. "My first assignment was on a planet called Keltora 4. It was supposed to be a simple posting, just providing medical care to the human miners working there. But Keltora 4 was not an empty world. It had native inhabitants, a species called the Keltorians." Shira listened intently, her arm forgotten, the pain dulled by the medicine Jake had given her. Outside the window, a distant nebula painted the darkness with streaks of purple and pink. But neither of them noticed. Jake's voice was steady, calm, the voice of someone who had learned to carry grief without letting it crush him. "The Keltorians were beautiful," Jake continued. "Not beautiful like you might think of it, but beautiful in their strangeness. They were crystalline, made of living minerals. They looked like walking gemstones, catching the light and throwing it back in 100 different colors. They did not speak with sound like we do. They communicated through vibrations in the ground, through the crystals in their bodies resonating with each other." He paused, taking another sip of his drink. "When I arrived on Keltora 4, the Keltorians were dying. There was a sickness spreading through them, something that made their crystal structure break down and crumble. They were literally falling apart. The human miners did not care much. To them, the Keltorians were just natives, obstacles to the mining operation. But I could not ignore it." Shira's hand moved unconsciously to her bandaged arm, feeling the pulse of her own blood beneath the wrapping. She tried to imagine beings made of crystal, tried to imagine them dying, breaking into pieces. It was a horrible thought. "What did you do?" she asked softly. Jake's smile returned, but this time it was stronger, touched with pride. "I did what any good medic would do. I studied them. I learned about them. I spent every spare moment trying to understand their biology, if you could even call it biology. It was more like geology mixed with something alive. I collected samples with their permission, ran tests, consulted with every expert I could reach through the communication arrays." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes distant, seeing the past. "My superiors wanted to evacuate the human workers and abandon the planet. They said it was not worth the risk, not worth the resources. But I refused to give up. I kept digging, kept researching. And finally, after 4 months of work, I found something." The medical bay's lights flickered briefly as the ship made a minor course correction. Neither Jake nor Shira noticed. "There was a mineral compound deep in the planet's crust," Jake explained. "Rare, difficult to reach, but it had properties that could stabilize the Keltorian crystal structure. I had to convince the mining company to help me extract it. That was almost harder than finding the cure itself. But eventually they agreed. I think they were worried about legal problems if the Keltorians all died and someone found out humans could have helped." He held up his left arm, showing Shira the swirling blue and silver tattoo more clearly. "I spent 3 more months administering the treatment to every Keltorian I could reach. There were over 3,000 of them spread across the planet. I traveled to remote crystal caves, climbed into deep caverns, risked cave-ins and equipment failures. But I reached them. I saved them." Shira's eyes were wet with tears. She had not expected to be so moved by this human's story. "And the tattoo?" When the last Keltorian was treated and healthy, their elders came to me, Jake said. They wanted to honor me in their way. They created this ink from their own bioluminescent fluids mixed with minerals from their world. They carved this pattern into my skin, and as it healed, it bonded with me. This mark will glow faintly for the rest of my life. In Keltorian culture, it means I am part of their people now. It means I gave them the gift of continued existence. He lowered his arm and met Shira's gaze. That was my first tattoo. That was when I understood that being a medic was not just about healing. The next day, Shira returned to the medical bay at the same time. Her arm felt much better, barely any pain at all. The bandage was still in place, but she could feel underneath that the wound was healing fast. Jake was waiting for her, sorting through medical instruments at his workstation. He looked up when she entered and gave her that same warm smile. "How is the arm?" he asked. "Much better," Shira replied. She sat down in the same chair as before. "You are a very good medic." "I have had a lot of practice," Jake said. He finished organizing his instruments and moved to sit across from her, just like yesterday. He was wearing a different shirt today, but again his sleeves were rolled up, showing his tattooed arms. "Are you ready for the next story?" Shira nodded eagerly. She had thought about Jake's first story all night, unable to sleep. The image of crystalline beings crumbling to dust and one determined human working to save them had stayed with her. Jake took a deep breath. He looked at his right arm, at a tattoo that was different from the glowing blue and silver of the Keltorian mark. This one was dark, rendered in deep crimson and black. The pattern was geometric, sharp angles and precise lines that formed shapes within shapes. It looked like a maze or perhaps a circuit board or maybe both. "This one is harder to talk about," Jake began. His voice was quieter than yesterday, more careful. 3 years after Keltora 4, I was stationed at a hub station in the Gamma sector. I had earned a reputation by then as someone who could work with alien biology. So when a distress call came in from a Varanthi colony ship, they asked for volunteers. I was the only one who raised my hand. Shira leaned forward. She had heard of the Varanthi. They were an insectoid species, organized in hive structures with a collective consciousness. Many species found them disturbing because of their appearance and their way of thinking. Even Shira, who tried to be open-minded, felt uncomfortable around them. The Varanthi ship had been struck by something, Jake continued. A pathogen, a disease, something that was killing them. They sent out a desperate call for help, but by the time we received it, hundreds were already dead. The Galactic Health Council sent an investigation team. They studied the situation from a safe distance and declared the ship a total loss. They said everyone aboard would die and nothing could be done. The ship was quarantined. No one was allowed to go near it. He paused, his hands gripping the arms of his chair, but I could not accept that. I kept thinking about the Keltorians, about how everyone had said they could not be saved either. I thought about all those Varanthi dying alone in space, with no one even trying to help them. So I made a choice that was probably crazy. I requested permission to board the ship. Shira's eyes widened. "They let you?" "Eventually," Jake said. "They tried to stop me at first. My commanding officer threatened to have me court-martialed, but I argued that someone had to try, and if I was willing to take the risk, they should let me. Finally, they agreed. They gave me a hazmat suit, basic supplies, and a small transport. They told me I probably would not come back alive. The medical bay felt very cold suddenly. Outside the window, a transport ship passed by, its lights blinking in the darkness. Neither Jake nor Shira paid attention to it. I boarded the Varanthi colony ship alone, Jake said. The moment I stepped inside, I knew it was bad. The ship was huge, designed to carry thousands of Varanthi. But it was so quiet. The Varanthi communicate through clicks and buzzes, a constant sound when they are healthy. But this ship was almost silent, just the occasional weak click from somewhere in the distance. He closed his eyes, remembering. The smell was terrible, even through my hazmat suit's filters. Dead Varanthi were everywhere. Their bodies were piled in corridors and sleeping chambers in the common areas. The survivors were too weak to move them. I found the queen in the central chamber. She was still alive, but barely. Her carapace was cracked, her antennae drooping. When she saw me, she tried to speak, but her clicks were so faint I could barely hear them. Shira felt tears forming in her eyes again. "What did you do?" "I set up a medical station in one of the cleaner chambers," Jake said. "I studied the sick Varanthi, took samples, Ran every test I could with my limited equipment. The pathogen was unlike anything I had ever seen. It attacked the Varanthi's nervous system, disrupting the neural connections that allowed them to function as a hive mind. Without that connection, they lost the will to live. They were social creatures who defined themselves by their connection to each other. This disease was isolating them, cutting them off from the hive, and it was killing them as surely as any poison. He opened his eyes and looked at Shira. I spent 43 days on that ship, 43 days alone with dying aliens, watching them suffer, watching them die despite my efforts. The ship's life support was failing. The food supplies were running out. I slept maybe 3 hours a night, spending every other moment working, studying, trying to find an answer. His voice grew even quieter, and then I got sick too. The pathogen broke through my hazmat suit somehow, or maybe I was too exhausted and made a mistake. I do not remember. I just remember waking up one day with a fever so high I was hallucinating. My head felt like it was splitting apart. I could not think straight. I was going to die there, just like the Varanthi. Shira held her breath. She knew Jake had survived, obviously, because he was sitting here telling the story, but hearing about how close he had come to death made her heart pound. In my fever, Jake continued, I had strange dreams. I dreamed I was connected to the Varanthi hive mind, feeling what they felt, seeing what they saw. And in that dream I understood something. The pathogen was not biological. It was not a virus or bacteria. It was something else. Something that existed in the quantum space where the Varanthi's collective consciousness operated. It was a corrupted signal. A piece of information that was spreading through their neural network like a computer virus. He held up his arm, showing the geometric tattoo more clearly. When I woke up from the fever, I was still sick, but my mind was clear. I had an idea. If the pathogen was a bad signal, maybe I could create a good signal to counter it. I staggered to the ship's communications array. I barely remember the next part. I was running on instinct and desperation. I reconfigured the array to broadcast on the same quantum frequencies the Varanthi used to communicate. I created a counter signal, a pattern of information designed to disrupt the pathogen. His eyes grew distant. I turned on the broadcast and collapsed. I do not know how long I was unconscious. When I woke up, the Queen was standing over me. She was clicking rapidly, her antennae moving in patterns of excitement. The other Varanthi were clicking too. The ship was full of sound again, full of life. The counter signal had worked. It had neutralized the pathogen, restored the hive-mind connection. They were saved. Shira let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. How many survived? 7,000, Jake said. Out of 12,000 who had been on the ship when the outbreak started. 7,000 who would have died if someone had not tried to help them. The Galactic Health Council was amazed. They studied what I had done, turned it into a standard treatment for quantum neural pathogens. I probably saved other species in the future too. Species that have not even encountered that kind of disease yet. He touched the crimson and black tattoo gently. The Queen gave me this mark. In Varanthi culture, tattoos are data patterns, information encoded into living tissue. This pattern represents the word sacrifice in their language. But it means more than just giving something up. It means choosing to suffer so that others might live. It means understanding that some things are worth more than your own safety. There was a long silence. The medical bay's machines hummed softly. Somewhere on the ship, someone laughed, the sound faint through the walls. Life continued, unaware of the stories being shared in this small room. I spent 3 months in a medical facility after that, Jake said, recovering from the disease, healing from the damage it did to my body. The fever had nearly cooked my brain. The doctor said I was lucky to be alive, let alone able to think clearly. But I did not feel lucky. I felt changed. The first tattoo from the Keltorians had taught me that every species had value. The second tattoo taught me that sometimes saving lives means risking your own. It taught me about sacrifice. Shira wiped her eyes. Were you afraid? On the ship, alone, dying? Jake considered the question. Yes, he said honestly. I was terrified. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when I wanted to call for rescue and leave the Varanthi to their fate. But I thought about those 7,000 lives. I thought about the children, the workers, the Queen, all of them dying alone in the darkness. And I knew I could not abandon them, even if staying meant I would die too. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. People think heroism is about being brave, about not feeling fear. But that is wrong. Real heroism is being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. It is seeing the terrible cost and paying it, because the alternative is worse. Every medic learns this, but most learn it in small ways. I learned it surrounded by dead aliens on a ship that smelled like rot and despair. Shira stood and moved to join him at the window. Your second tattoo is darker than the first in more ways than one. On the third day, Shira arrived at the medical bay with a heavy heart. She had spent the night thinking about Jake's second story, about the plague ship and the dying Varanthi. The image of him alone in that terrible place, fighting death itself while burning with fever, had haunted her dreams. She wondered how anyone could experience something like that and continue doing this work. But here was Jake, ready for another day, another story. Jake was preparing medical supplies when she entered. He looked up and smiled, but Shira could see the tiredness in his eyes. These stories were taking a toll on him too, she realized. Remembering was not easy. Good morning, Shira, Jake said. How is the arm? Shira held up her arm, turning it so he could see. The wound was completely healed, not even a scar remaining. Perfect. Your treatment worked wonderfully. I am glad, Jake said. He gestured to the chairs, and they both sat down in what had become their routine positions. Are you ready for the next story? Yes, Shira said softly. But I also want to say something first. Thank you for sharing these memories with me. I know they are painful. If it is too difficult, you do not have to continue. Jake shook his head. No, I want to tell you. These stories need to be told. Too many people forget that peace is built on understanding. And understanding comes from sharing our experiences, no matter how difficult they are. He looked at his left arm, at a tattoo that was different from the other two. This one was rendered in white and ice blue, colors that seemed to shimmer like frost in winter sunlight. The design showed a tree with spreading roots, delicate and beautiful. This tattoo came from a world called Karathi Prime, Jake began. It is a frozen planet, so cold that human technology barely functions there. The native species, the Karathi, live beneath the ice in vast cities carved from frozen water. They are telepathic, able to share thoughts and feelings directly with each other. They are gentle beings, peaceful and kind, with a culture based on harmony and connection to their frozen world. He paused, his jaw tightening, and they were poisoned by humans. Not by accident, but through carelessness and greed. Shira felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the medical bay. What happened? A human mining corporation got permission to operate on Karathi Prime, Jake explained. His voice was harder now, angry in a way she had not heard before. They were supposed to follow strict environmental protocols. The Karathi's water supply came from aquifers deep beneath the ice, and those aquifers were sacred to them, essential to their survival. The mining company promised to be careful. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together tightly. But careful costs money. Safety protocols take time. The company cut corners. They released toxic chemicals directly into the drilling sites, and those chemicals seeped into the aquifer system. Within months, the Karathi started getting sick. Their telepathic abilities began fading. The children were affected worst of all. They were losing their connection to their families, to their people, trapped alone in their own minds. Shira felt anger rising in her chest. Did the company admit what they did? No, Jake said bitterly. They denied everything. They hired scientists to produce reports saying the sickness was natural, unrelated to the mining. They offered the Karathi financial compensation and relocation to another world. They tried to buy their way out of responsibility. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the stars. I was sent to Karathi Prime as part of the official response team. The Galactic Health Council wanted to document what was happening, to study the illness, but I was not interested in just studying. The moment I saw those children, their telepathic voices silenced, their bodies weakening, I knew I could not just observe. I had to act. What did you do? Shira asked. Jake turned back to face her. I went rogue. I accessed the mining company's private files and found evidence of their negligence. Emails discussing the decision to skip safety procedures. Reports showing they knew about the contamination and covered it up. Internal discussions about whether it was cheaper to pay compensation or clean up the mess. They had chosen compensation. His hands clenched into fists. I copied everything and sent it to every major news network in the galaxy. I contacted environmental advocacy groups, political representatives, anyone who would listen. I broke every protocol, violated my contract with the Health Council, and probably committed several crimes. But I did not care. Those children were dying because of human greed, and someone needed to expose the truth. Shira leaned back in her chair, amazed. You risked everything. It was worth it, Jake said. The scandal destroyed the mining company. They faced massive fines. Their executives went to prison, and the Galactic Council imposed new regulations on all off-world mining operations. But that was not enough for me. The Karathi were still sick. The water was still poisoned. So I stayed. He returned to his chair and sat down, his anger fading into something softer. I spent 2 years on Karathi Prime. 2 years in the freezing cold working with local Karathi scientists to develop a bioremediation process. We had to clean the aquifers, remove every trace of the toxic chemicals, and do it without damaging the delicate ecosystem that the Karathi depended on. How did you survive the cold? Shira asked. You said human technology barely works there. Barely, but not never, Jake said with a small smile. I had a heated shelter, insulated clothing, all the basic equipment I needed. But it was still hard. The cold seeped into everything. I was always shivering, always tired from my body working to stay warm. The Karathi tried to help me, offering me shelter in their ice cities, but their world was built for them, not for humans. I would have frozen to death in their warmth. He touched the white and blue tattoo gently, but I learned so much from them. The Karathi have a completely different approach to medicine. They believe that healing is not just about fixing the body, but about restoring connections. They taught me how to use telepathic techniques to help patients feel less alone, less afraid. Even though I was not telepathic, I learned to apply their principles in other ways, to make my patients feel heard and understood. And you saved them? Shira asked. You cleaned the water? It took 2 years, but yes, Jake said. We developed a process using specialized bacteria that could break down the toxic chemicals. We introduced these bacteria into the aquifer system gradually, carefully monitoring the results. Slowly, month by month, the water became cleaner. The Karathi started recovering. The children regained their telepathic abilities. I will never forget the day I saw a mother and her child connect mentally for the first time in over a year. The joy, the relief, the pure happiness in their faces, that made every freezing night, every moment of cold and exhaustion worth it. He was quiet for a moment, lost in the memory. Then he continued. But I was angry for a long time. Angry at the mining company. Angry at the system that allowed such things to happen. Angry at humanity for being so careless with other lives. The Karathi helped me with that too. They taught me that anger can be a tool for change, but it should not be a poison in your heart. They showed me how to transform rage into determination, how to use my feelings to drive me forward without letting them destroy me. Shira understood now why this tattoo was so important. The tree with spreading roots. What does it mean in Karathi culture? It is their symbol for someone who heals not just bodies but entire worlds, Jake explained. The roots represent connections, how everything is linked together. The tree represents growth and life. They gave me this tattoo as a way of saying I did not just cure a sickness. I restored the balance of their world. I gave them back their future. He looked at his arm, at the shimmering white and blue design. This tattoo taught me that medicine is about more than treating individual patients. Sometimes healing means fighting for justice. Sometimes being a medic means being a warrior, not with weapons but with truth and determination. The Karathi children were dying because of human greed, and if I had just treated their symptoms without addressing the cause, I would have failed them. Shira wiped tears from her eyes. She seemed to cry every time Jake told these stories, but she did not mind. The emotions were real, the connections genuine. You are not just a medic. You are a protector. I try to be, Jake said quietly, but I am also just a man who could not stand by and watch injustice happen. Anyone in my position should have done the same. I am not special. I just refuse to accept that some lives matter less than others. There was a comfortable silence between them. The medical bay felt warm and safe, a small pocket of peace in the vast ship sailing through space. Outside, the universe continued its endless expansion, but inside, 2 beings from different worlds shared understanding. The first tattoo taught me that every species has value, Jake said, summarizing. The second taught me about sacrifice. The third taught me about justice and anger and using both to create change. Each lesson built on the last. Each experience made me better at what I do. Shira nodded. And you still have 2 more tattoos, Yes, Jake confirmed. 2 more stories, each as important as these 3. But I think that is enough for today. These memories are exhausting to relive. I understand, Shira said. She stood to leave, then hesitated. Jake, may I ask you something personal? Shira came to the medical bay on the 4th day, with a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Each of Jake's stories had been powerful, each one revealing new depths to this quiet human medic. She wondered what the 4th tattoo would teach her, what new lesson Jake had learned in his journey across the stars. Jake was standing by the window when she arrived, his arms crossed, staring out at the darkness. He turned when he heard the door open and gave her a tired smile. Shira noticed that he looked more worn today, as if the act of remembering was taking its toll. "Good morning, Shira," he said. "Thank you for coming back." "I would not miss it," she replied, taking her usual seat. "Your stories have become important to me. They help me understand what it means to truly care about others." Jake sat down across from her and looked at his right forearm. There was a tattoo there that Shira had noticed before but had not asked about. It was rendered in deep amber and gold with patterns that seemed almost alive. As she watched, she could swear the patterns were moving slightly, shifting in ways that made her eyes uncertain. "This tattoo is special," Jake said, holding up his arm so she could see it better. "It actually vibrates. Not enough for most people to notice, but if you touch it, you can feel it. It is the most unusual mark I carry." He settled back in his chair. "This one came from a world called Draylen. It is a planet that most species cannot even visit. The gravity is 3 times what humans are used to. The atmosphere is toxic, filled with gases that would kill you in seconds. The temperature swings between boiling during the day and freezing at night. It is a world that seems designed to reject life. Yet the Draylen have lived there for millions of years." Shira listened carefully, already feeling sympathy for whatever Jake had endured on such a hostile world. "The Draylen are silicon-based life forms," Jake continued. "Not carbon like most species, but silicon. They are living rocks in a way, though that description does not do them justice. They have consciousness, emotions, culture. They communicate through vibrations, sending signals through the ground and through their bodies. They cannot hear sound the way we do. They feel it." He paused, his expression growing darker. "About 6 years ago, the Draylen's home world was hit by a cosmic radiation burst. These events are rare but devastating when they happen. The burst damaged the planet's magnetic field, which normally protected the Draylen from harmful radiation. Without that protection, the radiation began affecting them directly." "What did it do to them?" Shira asked. "It caused their silicon structure to grow out of control," Jake said. "Imagine cancer, but instead of cells dividing too fast, it was their actual body material, growing in random directions. Spikes of silicon would erupt from their bodies. Their limbs would become too heavy to move. Eventually, the uncontrolled growth would crush their vital organs and they would die." "It was slow and painful." Shira felt sick. "That sounds horrible." "It was," Jake agreed. "The Draylen sent out a call for help, but very few species responded. Their world was too dangerous, their biology too alien. Most doctors would not even try. The Galactic Health Council sent a research team, but they stayed in orbit studying from a safe distance. They concluded that nothing could be done. The Draylen would have to evacuate their world, if they could even survive the transition to a different gravity and atmosphere." He looked down at his hands. But evacuation was not really an option. The Draylen were adapted to their world in ways that made leaving almost impossible. Moving them would be like asking fish to live on land. They would survive for a while, but they would never truly live. They would spend the rest of their existence as refugees, disconnected from everything they knew. "So you went to help them," Shira said. "It was not a question." "I did," Jake confirmed. "Against all advice, against all common sense, I volunteered to go to Draylen. They built me a special habitat, a reinforced structure that could withstand the gravity and protect me from the atmosphere. They gave me an exoskeleton, a mechanical suit that would support my body against the crushing weight. And they sent me down to the surface." He closed his eyes, remembering. "The moment I landed, I understood why no one else had volunteered. The gravity was crushing. Even with the exoskeleton, every movement was exhausting. Walking 10 steps felt like running a marathon. My bones ached constantly. My muscles screamed. The exoskeleton did most of the work, but my body still had to function inside it, and that was torture." Shira imagined Jake in a mechanical suit, struggling against impossible weight, and felt her heart break a little. "How long were you there?" 6 months, Jake said quietly. 6 months of living in that crushing gravity, working every day to understand Draylen biology and find a cure. I could not communicate with them easily. They spoke through vibrations, and we had to use translation devices that converted their signals into sounds I could hear, and my sounds into vibrations they could feel. It was slow and frustrating. He opened his eyes and looked at Shira. But I learned. I studied their silicon structure, the way their bodies grew and maintained themselves. I examined the radiation damage, trying to understand why it caused uncontrolled growth. I ran simulations, tested theories, failed over and over again. Every day was pain. Every night I would remove the exoskeleton in my habitat and feel my body trying to recover from the stress. I was breaking down slowly but surely. Why did you stay? Shira asked. If it was destroying you, why not leave and let someone else try? Because there was no one else, Jake said simply. I was the only one willing to be there. If I left, the Draylen would die. All of them. Their entire species would be wiped out, not by a natural disaster but by simple bad luck and the indifference of the galaxy. I could not accept that. He held up his arm again, showing the amber and gold tattoo. After 4 months, I had a breakthrough. I realized that the uncontrolled growth was similar to how crystals form. The radiation was disrupting the natural growth patterns that kept the Draylen's bodies stable. I theorized that if I could introduce the correct harmonic frequencies, I could reset those patterns, restore the natural balance. Did it work? Shira asked, though she knew the answer must be yes. It took me 2 more months to develop the right frequencies, Jake said. I had to build special equipment that could generate and project the harmonic signals. And then I had to test it. The first Draylen who volunteered to try the treatment was named Korthax. He was dying, his body covered in random silicon growths that made him look like a walking mountain of spikes. Jake's voice grew softer. I will never forget watching the treatment work. I activated the harmonic generator, and slowly over the course of hours the uncontrolled growths began to recede. They did not disappear, but they stopped growing and even shrank slightly. Korthax's body began to stabilize. He communicated through the translator, a series of vibrations that meant something like joy or relief. He was going to live. Shira felt tears forming again. You saved him. I saved him and then 10,000 more, Jake said. I spent my last month on Draylen personally treating every Draylen I could reach. Some were too far gone, too damaged by the uncontrolled growth. But most could be helped. Most could be saved. By the time I left, the Draylen had the knowledge and equipment to treat themselves, to heal their people, to survive. He touched the amber and gold tattoo. The Draylen elders gave me this mark. It is made with a special ink that contains microscopic silicon particles that vibrate at the same frequency they use to speak. This tattoo is literally speaking in Draylen language, constantly, forever. It says my name in their tongue. It identifies me as one of them, a Draylen in spirit if not in body. Shira reached out hesitantly. May I touch it? Of course, Jake said, extending his arm. Shira placed her fingers gently on the tattoo. She felt it immediately, a faint vibration like a distant hum. It was strange and beautiful, this constant reminder of a species that spoke without words, that lived in a world that seemed impossible. What happened to you after you left? Shira asked. You said the gravity was destroying you. Jake nodded grimly. I spent 3 months in a medical facility recovering. The constant gravity stress had damaged my bones, compressed my spine, strained my muscles. I had to go through intensive physical therapy to regain my strength. The doctors told me I had shortened my lifespan, that the damage to my body would have long-term effects. They were not wrong. I still have back pain from time to time. My bones are weaker than they should be. He smiled sadly. But I would do it again. The Draylen are alive because I was willing to endure 6 months of pain. That is a fair trade. Shira pulled her hand back from the tattoo, still feeling the echo of those vibrations. What did this experience teach you? Jake thought about this carefully. The first 3 tattoos taught me about value, sacrifice, and justice. This one taught me about perseverance and the cost of caring. It taught me that sometimes saving lives means damaging yourself permanently. The Draylen world was crushing me, slowly grinding my body into dust, but I stayed because leaving would have meant abandoning them. He looked at his hands, at the scars and calluses that marked them. It taught me that there are limits to what a body can endure, but those limits are further away than most people think. Pain is not the same as... On the 5th day, Shira entered the medical bay with a strange mixture of emotions. She was eager to hear the final tattoo story, but she was also sad that these daily meetings would soon end. Jake had become important to her, not just as a healer but as a teacher and friend. His stories had changed how she saw the galaxy, how she thought about life and purpose. Jake was waiting for her, sitting in his usual chair. He looked more rested today, as if preparing to share this final story had given him strength. When Shira sat down, he smiled at her warmly. "This is the last one," he said, holding up his left arm. There was a tattoo there that was unlike all the others. It was green and brown with patterns that looked like leaves and vines. But the most remarkable thing was that it seemed to be growing. The edges of the leaves were slightly different each time Shira looked at them, as if they were alive and changing with the seasons. "This tattoo is made from living plant cells," Jake explained. "They are specially modified to survive in human tissue. They actually photosynthesize when exposed to light, drawing energy from the sun. This mark grows with me, changes with me, lives with me. It is the most unusual tattoo I have, and it represents the most difficult rescue I ever attempted." He settled back in his chair, preparing to tell his final story. 8 years ago, I learned about a species called the sylphid. They were plant-based life forms, barely recognized as sentient by the Galactic Council. Most species did not understand them because they thought and lived on a completely different timescale. A conversation that would take minutes for us would take days for them. Their metabolism was so slow that they seemed almost motionless. Shira leaned forward, fascinated. "I have never heard of plant-based sentient life. Most people have not," Jake said. The sylphid kept to themselves on their home world, a planet they called the Garden. It was a beautiful place, covered in vast forests of beings who could think and feel but did so at the pace of growing trees. They had a culture based on patience and deep connection to their world. They sang songs that took years to complete. They told stories that spanned generations. His expression grew sad. But their sun was dying. It was entering an early expansion phase, a process that would normally take millions of years but was happening much faster than expected. The increased radiation was burning their forests. The sylphid were dying slowly, day by day, as their world became too hot for them to survive. "Could they not evacuate?" Shira asked. "That was the problem," Jake said. The Galactic Council sent a team to assess the situation. They concluded that the sylphid could not be relocated. Plant-based life forms do not travel well. They are rooted to their world, literally and figuratively. The Council decided that the sylphid would die with their planet. It was tragic but unavoidable. He clenched his fists. "I refused to accept that. I requested permission to visit the garden and study the sylphid myself. The Council thought I was wasting my time, but they allowed it. So I went to the garden, and I spent time among the sylphid learning their ways." "How did you communicate with them?" Shira asked. "If they thought so slowly?" "It was the hardest part," Jake admitted. "I had to learn to slow down, to be patient in ways I never had before." The sylphid communicated through chemical exchanges, through pheromones and hormones released into the air and soil. I had to use special equipment to detect and translate these chemicals. A simple greeting would take hours. A meaningful conversation would take days. He smiled at the memory. "But I learned. I spent an entire year just learning their language, understanding their culture. I lived among them, walking through their forests, sitting beneath their branches, breathing in their chemical songs. And slowly, gradually, I began to understand them. They were not less intelligent than other species. They were just different, operating on a timescale that made patience itself seem rushed." "What did you discover?" Shira asked. "I discovered that the sylphid could enter a dormant state," Jake said. "In times of extreme stress, they could produce seeds, special forms of themselves that could survive harsh conditions. The seeds would remain dormant until they found suitable soil and conditions. Then they would grow into new sylphid. It was similar to how some plants on Earth could survive winter by going dormant." His eyes lit up with the memory of that breakthrough. "I realized that if I could help the sylphid enter dormancy properly, they could be transported to a new world. It would not be easy. I would need to find a suitable planet, prepare the soil, ensure the right conditions, and I would need to convince the sylphid to trust me, to leave the only world they had ever known." "How long did it take?" Shira asked. 5 years, Jake said. 5 years of my life dedicated to this one project. First, I had to develop the process for helping the sylphid enter dormancy without dying. Then I had to search for a suitable planet, one with the right atmosphere, the right soil chemistry, the right distance from its sun. I found a world called New Garden, perfect in almost every way. He paused, his voice growing emotional. Then came the hardest part. I had to convince 3 million Sylphid to trust me. 3 million individuals who had lived their entire existence rooted to their world, who had never imagined leaving. I spent months moving among them, explaining through slow chemical exchanges what was happening to their son. What would happen if they stayed? What hope I could offer them? Did they understand? Shira asked softly. Eventually, Jake said. The Sylphid were slow to think but not stupid. They understood that their world was dying. They understood that staying meant extinction. But leaving meant abandoning everything they knew, every root that connected them to their history, every branch that held their memories. It was asking them to die and be reborn. He looked down at his hands. Some refused. About 500,000 Sylphid chose to stay on the garden, to die with their world. I had to respect that choice even though it broke my heart. But the rest agreed to try. They trusted me with their lives, with their future. Shira felt tears forming. How did you move them? Very carefully, Jake said. I helped each Sylphid produce their seed form. It was a process that took weeks for each individual. I had to monitor their chemical signals, ensure they were entering dormancy correctly, collect the seeds in special containers that would protect them during transport. For months I worked day and night, helping Sylphid transform themselves into seeds. He held up his arm, showing the living tattoo. Then came the transport. I chartered ships, organized the largest species relocation in galactic history. We moved 3 million seeds to New Garden, carefully planting each one in soil that I had personally prepared. I spent years studying New Garden's ecosystem, modifying the soil chemistry, introducing helpful microorganisms, ensuring everything was perfect. His voice grew stronger, and then I waited. The seeds took time to germinate, to grow, to become Sylphid again. I lived on New Garden for another year, watching over the seeds, protecting them from native predators, ensuring they had everything they needed. And slowly, gradually, they began to grow. Did they survive? Shira asked, though she knew they must have. They did more than survive, Jake said proudly. They thrived. The first Sylphid to fully awaken on New Garden was named Thornweaver, and when he recognized me, when his chemical signature spelled out my name in gratitude, I wept. I stood in that alien forest and cried like I had never cried before because I had done the impossible. I had saved a species from extinction. I had given them a new world. He touched the living tattoo gently. Thornweaver and the other Sylphid elders gave me this mark. They modified some of their own cells to survive in human tissue, creating a living tattoo that would grow and change with me. These leaves and vines are alive, Shira. They are part of the Sylphid growing on my skin. As long as I live, part of the Sylphid will live with me. Shira reached out and touched the tattoo. She could feel it. The faint warmth of living tissue, the subtle texture of leaves that were real, not just ink. It was beautiful and strange and deeply moving. What did this teach you? She asked. Jake thought for a long moment. This tattoo taught me about patience and hope. It taught me that some problems cannot be solved quickly, that some rescues take years of dedication. The Sylphid were dying slowly over decades, and saving them required me to commit a huge portion of my life to their cause. He looked at the tattoo with deep affection. It also taught me about recognition. The Galactic Council did not see the Sylphid as sentient, because they did not fit the Council's definition of intelligence. They were too slow, too different, too alien, but I learned that intelligence comes in many forms. The Sylphid were wise in ways that faster species could not understand. They had perspectives on time and existence that came from living slowly, from experiencing years the way we experience days. You prevented an extinction, Shira said. That is the greatest achievement of all. It is, Jake agreed. But it also showed me the limits of what one person can do. 500,000 Sylphid chose to die on the garden. I could not save them because they did not want to be saved. I had to accept that some losses are inevitable, that not every life can be preserved. That was a hard lesson. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. The Sylphid taught me humility. They taught me that being a medic is not about